Okay, so you guys came back to the U.S. and around age 17, he came up with the same-o theme, and it was based on like a religion that he considered like a fake religion in a way, like a faux religion.
I think a lot of it was him being, what's the word? His sarcasm.
Right.
You know,
and about same-o is short for same old shit.
Same old shit.
Okay. And he started hitting the streets and kind of drawing this. Would you guys see this as you're walking around Manhattan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he was very excited about it.
I mean, these days you see a lot of artists, you know, like you see like the Obey all over the place. But he was the first one to really do that, the sort of repetition of let me put out this kind of theme over and over again and kind of put it all over the city. And he really established a following with that. But people didn't exactly know who he was back then.
Yeah. He kind of created the first social media posts, you know, where it's just like a sentence or, you know, something, something shocking.
Right.
And at one point, he was going to school, and I guess there was a prank that he pulled on the principal, and he got kicked out of school.
Yes.
Was there a problem with, because I'm an immigrant as well. And I remember my family when I told them I'm going to become a full-time DJ.
So there you go. You get
my
it.
mom hated the idea. She said I was wasting my life.
Where are you from?
Well, I was born in the Ukraine. It used to be Russia. It used to be the USSR at the time. I came over when I was 5 years old. I grew up in the Bay Area.
Okay.
And
so you're first generation.
I'm actual immigrant.
That's right. Okay,
I'm an actual,
got it.
An actual immigrant, exactly. So I can understand the situation. I can understand the parents. I went to Berkeley and I had a computer science degree, and suddenly I said I'm going to be an artist instead, and my parents had no idea why the hell I was doing this. Right. So I could relate to the situation. So when your brother got kicked out of school, how did your dad react to it?
You know what? To be honest, I don't remember. I was, we were, young. There was a 7-8 year difference between Jean-Michel and I. He just went on to the next school.
He wasn't happy.
I believe to City-ass school after that.
Well, that happened at City-ass.
Yeah, that happened at, it was like a
No,
shaving
I thought it was Murrow.
No.
I have it as the City-ass school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was at Morrow. I'm sorry, it was at City-ass. Our father wasn't happy. I mean, who would be, come on, you're in high school and this is happening. And, our father is kind of like wringing his hands, like, how is this guy going to pay his rent? And, because at the time, again, like the success was going into corporate. And so for him, what he always wanted was to make sure that we would be able to take care of ourselves and be self-sustaining. That was a huge value in our family. So for him, it's like, if you're getting kicked out of high school, what's this guy going to do? He's going to be living on the streets. And then he's like, no, I'm leaving. And he's like hanging out on friends' couches and on park benches and hanging out. I mean, that is frightening, for a parent to witness, where there's no basis for comparison. There's nothing to compare that life to. For you to be, in the 70s with dreadlocks as a Black guy talking about, I'm going to be a painter. Like, painters at that time, it was a very painting, and the art world was a very different looking place.
Did the dreadlocks happen in high school?
No, it wasn't that early. It was
later?
a little bit later. Maybe it was about 20.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember how old he was. I don't remember how old he was.
Okay. Well, in 1978, after he had been doing the same-o as an alternative to God, the Village Voice actually did a whole article on him.
Rene Ricard.
Exactly. Was that sort of his first kind of break into the media world? Going from like a street artist to actually being recognized by media?
I guess you can say that. Yeah, I think, the Village Voice is very like, underground. This is what's going on in the world.
In New York.
But I guess looking back on it, it could be considered his first break in the media world.
I think so.
Okay. And then he went from spraying with a spray paint can to actually going to canvas. And his first piece he sold to Debbie Harry.
That's the
story.
That is a story.
For $200.
Yes, Cadillac Moon.
That's the story.
In 1981 for $200. Probably worth about $20 million today if we're lucky. If not, that would probably be a bargain.
That doesn't go on sale.
She still owns that piece?
No,
I don't think so.
Oh, she sold it?
There are so many people kicking themselves.
Right. And then you kind of start seeing him sort of in the mix in the New York kind of new age, whatever you would call it, because he actually showed up in the Rapture video as the DJ.
Yes.
I never knew this. I
wasn't
clearly
supposed
remember
to
this
be.
video.
Yeah, it
My
was
man
supposed to
Fab
be
Five Freddy's in it. And
Yeah,
I remember that was a very pivotal.
Grandmaster Flash.
Yeah, it's supposed to be
Yeah.
Grandmaster Flash. Exactly. And this was, I mean, hip hop was still sort of coming along, and this was the first, you know, she's sort of rapping, and she was kind of incorporating the hip hop kind of theme.
Yep.
And your brother was really, not only was he painting, but he was also doing music as well. The Ramalzi record, which he worked on the record, and he also did the cover.
He produced and he did work on the record cover, yes.
And Tartown Records was his company. He produced it on his own label.
Well, and then his pieces just started blowing up. He just started, you know, the pieces, you know, that he started to sell just kept going up and up and up. And by the mid 80s, he was essentially the highest earning artist of that day.
Was he?
I don't know, to be honest.
Now, in terms of your relationship with him, you said there was a couple of years where he didn't come home, but then he came back and said, hey, I did this. I'm successful at it.
Yeah, I mean, we saw him. It wasn't like he disappeared or no one saw him. Like, we saw him, but it was he didn't live at home.
Right.
Yeah.
Were you realizing how big he was getting in the art world?
We were young. For us, we knew he was he was an artist.
Right.
And he always, that was what he was doing. But we didn't really, it's like any other sibling. It's not like, I always say this, it's not like he was walking around the house with a beret or telling us how much he was selling paintings for. It was just observing.
Because I would say I was a young teenager at the time. I was probably 13, 14 years old.
Right.
I knew that he had become the painter that he wanted to be. He traveled a lot because he would go to, exhibitions overseas. So, and we would go to some of the openings that he had. Mm-hmm. So we recognized it, but I don't think we really had the capacity to understand how large he had become.
Well, right. We talked about how the Village Voice did an article on him, but then on February 10th, 1985, New York Times Magazine did a whole feature on him.
That's right.
It's called New Art, New Money, The Marketing of an American Artist.
Yes.
Yeah. And by that time, he was making $1.4 million a year.
You know more than us. We were not checking for his checkbook.
Yeah. No, but I'm saying he was really a rock star by this point.
He was like the first, if I may have this fact wrong, but he was, I think, the first Black man ever on the cover, Black person ever, or person of color, on the cover of the New York Times Magazine. We actually have a signed copy, a copy that he signed to our dad as part of the exhibition in the studio gallery. That was a big deal. It was a huge deal.
For him, for my dad.
Yeah.
What was some of the highlights for you guys during this time when he was because he was also doing runway shows, he was
Comme des Garçons and
right, exactly, and he was doing these exhibits not just in New York but Europe, all over the world. He was really, and you also, you didn't see any Black painters that even remotely were at this level. He completely broke that glass ceiling.
He did.
And was there? Cause I remember there was I'd read something there where it was he was extremely successful and he was, loved in the art world, but he would go outside and he couldn't get a cab sometimes. Right. Or he would go into an art gallery and they would recognize him. They would ask him to leave.
Yes.
Was that something that he kind of was bothered by?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Jean-Michel dealt with, his Blackness and racism since he was young. Yeah. He dealt with it when we lived in Puerto Rico. As you say, he would try to get cabs and he was not able to. It's the reason why we have the bicycle. That was his bicycle, and that's the symbolism of him riding around town because he couldn't get a cab.
Well, because he had the dreadlocks back then, and unless you knew him.
Correct. And he would even have friends hail cabs for him, and as soon as he put his hand on the door, they would pull off. So it's something that he dealt with his entire life. And he had to navigate in this world that was very homogeneous And I think that was very difficult for him at times.
And also, I just want to add something to it, if it's okay. You know, the bike, it's interesting because you have the bike and it's in front of his studio at Great Jones. So he's in there creating all this art and creating this life. And he has a bike because of that. And even the fact that during this conversation, that it was because he had dreadlocks, even that, like, that's so much a part of what's happening in this world that who gives a crap what and I'm not talking about you, but just this general idea that, and I think that was some of what our dad was struggling with, where if you're a creative and you have dreadlocks or you're expressing who you are, your identity in some way that's outside of this homogeneous kind of norm, it in some way or another makes you almost responsible for the prejudices against you. You know, there was nothing aggressive about Jean-Michel
at all.
Right? So if a person had the ability to see beyond their own ideas of what a Black man with dreadlocks was about, they would see a very soft-spoken, creative, warm-hearted human being. And so he navigated that, and to navigate that as he's also on this incredibly upward trajectory of his career, there was a lot of pressure there for him.
But when you look at some of the artwork, like for example, one of the pieces has two cops beating a Black man. And you see this in a lot of his works.
Jailbirds.
But was that something he experienced himself? Or is this just things that he saw moving around New York?
More of things that he saw, definitely. I'm not going to say that he had a lot of physical interactions with police officers, but there was a time in New York City where police were very aggressive.
Oh yeah, during the 80s, the Giuliani time, the whole crackdown. And
even before that, Cuomo back then, right? And so, Michael Stewart was an artist like Jean-Michel, and he, was beaten to death by police officers in New York. It's also the topic of Herring's painting, the one that they cut out of the wall. And so there was a lot of that happening in the city. New York City was very different back then. It was gritty. There was like the Upper East Side and, Central Park West. And then there were these grittier parts.
Right. Times Square was gritty back then.
Very.
It's not the Times Square of today.
No,
not
it was
at all.
not like, people walking around with cameras and, selfie sticks.
It was dangerous.
It was dangerous.
Right.
It was gritty. And it was, there were a lot of outlaws, the police and people. It was a tough time.
When you watch the Basquiat movies, you kind of see a strained relationship with his father. But from what I understand, that's not exactly accurate. I'm talking about as he became a superstar and so forth.
So, there are many photographs where you will see, we have one in our catalog where you could see that there was a lot of respect and love there. I think what you need to understand is, I think there's always a time where a parent and a child conflict, because a parent always has their idea of what they want from their child, and their child has free will to do what it is that they want to do. And so once they got to that, that reckoning and realized that this was the right path for Jean-Michel, their relationship was renewed and a good one. And there was a lot of love there.
There was a lot of respect. And then also, our dad was a businessman. And so Jean-Michel's like an artist. And our dad is like, I want to come in and help you. And Jean-Michel's like, nah, I got it. But that's like, that is what happens.
Yeah.
That is the relationship sometimes between parents and children. And I think, again, there are some things that people do a little bit differently today that are different from the way things happened before. Again, there was no Jean-Michel Basquiat that Jean-Michel could point to to say, listen, this has happened before, I can do it. He was pioneering.
And he was the first.
He was the first.
Yeah.